Hello, Econ students. In today's lesson, what we're going to do is take a look at this thing called the production possibilities curve. So in our last video, we examined kind of a little bit the idea, and it's not exactly the same, but we looked at that idea if this person has a certain amount of money and they want to buy these two things, if they buy more of one, they got to give up some of the other one. So that idea applies to all sorts of things that we look at in an economy, and it's modeled in this thing called the production possibilities curve. And we're going to use that to represent how countries make decisions or people make decisions. It's a great model that we start off with in economics. So what we want to do is we want to have this idea of what we're going to pick a country. So our country is going to be the country of Usonia. All right, so that's going to be our country, Usonia. And Usonia, this country, it has a certain amount of people, right? So it's got a fixed amount of people that it has in the country. Every country has a certain amount of people, 1 million people, 10 million people, whatever it is, it's got a certain amount of people. It has resources that it can use, right? So it has a certain amount of people, it has a certain amount of resources. It can produce stuff, it can have people work, and then it has this stuff, and we'll use this term more in a little bit, but it has this term called capital. So it's got machines, it's got tools, it's got things like that. So this country has all of this stuff that it uses to produce things, okay? And what we're going to see is that this stuff right here is what we will put, it's finite. Oops, looks incorrect. Let me erase that, make it look a bit better. All right, so this stuff is finite. There we go. It's not infinite, it's finite. And since it is finite, we have to make decisions how to best utilize these things. And so we're going to look at a simplified version of how a country can choose to use these finite resources. So in order to kind of show what real life looks like, what economists do is they create a graph. Okay? So that's what we're going to do a lot in economics. We're going to create a graph to represent how the world works. And so this is going to represent the choices that Usonia has to make. Right? And on one side, we're going to say, okay, this country, they can make stuff that, let's say, consumers want. All right, so I ran off the screen a little bit. All right, they can make stuff that the consumer wants to buy. Or they can make stuff that, and we're going to use that term again, that is capital. All right, so consumers don't want machines. They don't go and buy a factory. What consumers want are they want cars, or t-shirts, or iPads, or cell phones. Or there's this stuff that's capital. It's stuff that we use to build other things. It's machinery and factories and things like that. So this country of Usonia can choose to produce stuff that consumers want. I should put maybe consumer goods over here, or it can choose to produce capital goods. Now, it has more choices than that, obviously, but this is a simplified model of a complex world, right? So just like we did in the last one, we only have, in the last video we talked about it, the person only has a certain amount of money, right? He only had $10. So what's he going to do with those $10? He can buy, these two things, and he can buy a combination of these two things. Now, we don't necessarily have a certain amount of money, but we have a certain amount of these finite resources over here. We only have a certain amount of people. We only have a certain amount of resources like land, oil or trees, lumber, things like that. We only have a certain amount of it. Even though we might have a lot of it, there's a finite amount of it. All right? And we only have a certain amount of capital. And so with that, we can make decisions. So let's say we take all of these things over here. We take every single person, every single resource we have, every single machine that we have, and we decide just to produce consumer goods. What if we just produced consumer goods? My question is, how many capital goods could we produce? If we took every person, every resource, and every machine and tool and dedicated it to purchasing consumer goods, how many capital goods could we make? If you think about that one for a second, the answer should be easy. If we take all of these resources and we just produce consumer goods, we can only produce 0 capital goods, right? So when we make a mark over here, let's say that is right here. We're not going to use a number because we're just kind of, the numbers don't matter. But if we use all of our resources, and we'll actually give this a letter just to make it simple, point A over here represents 0 capital goods and the maximum amount of consumer goods, right? That's what point A represents. Now let's go to the flip side, right? What if they take all of the people, all of the resources, all of the capital, all of the machines and tools, and they just put it into making capital goods? Every person, every minute of every day is working just on capital goods. The question is, how many consumer goods can they make? Right? And we should be able to come up with an easy answer for that one as well. And the answer is B over here. Right? They can make 0 consumer goods and they can make only capital goods. So A represents the maximum amount of consumer goods, right? So A represents a maximum amount, but just consumer goods. And B represents a maximum amount just of capital goods, right? So let's say they wanted to make some sort of combination in between those two things. All right, let's just say, for example, we're at point A. Okay? Let's say we're at point A. And they decided, you know what, we need capital goods, we need machines, we need tools, we need things like that. So we want more of B right here. We want to get more B. We want to be over here somewhere, maybe for B. Now, can they just decide, you know what, we're going to keep this amount of consumer goods and we're just going to get more capital goods? In other words, can they move to, let's say, this point right here? Right? So they keep the same amount of consumer goods and they just decide we'll just make more capital goods. And let me take that one step further and kind of keep pushing it to the point where you kind of come up with the right answer. What if they said, you know what, we're just going to do that again. We're going to keep the exact same amount of consumer goods, but we want more capital goods as well. And we end up at this point over here. What if they did it again? They said, you know what, we're going to keep building as much consumer goods as we can, but I want more capital goods. And we're at this point over here. So do you see this line just kind of keep moving out this way? Is that possible? Can you take every single resource that you have, dedicate it all into consumer goods, which is point A, and then just say, we're just going to make more of this other good? And the answer is no, you can't. And the reason is you're using all of your resources to make all consumer goods. If you decide to make capital goods, what do you have to do? I'm going to pause for a second. I want you to tell me, what do you have to do if you decide to make some capital goods? Well, the answer is you have to give up something. It's called opportunity cost. We've hammered on it in the last couple of videos. You got to give up something. So let's say they decide they're going to make more capital goods. There's an opportunity cost of that, and it's a certain amount of consumer goods, right? Because some people, some land, and some resources are going to go to making capital goods, you have to give up some consumer goods. So this point is going to be, let's say, right about there. And they could do it again. We want capital goods, but we got to give up some. And there's the new point. We want capital goods, but we got to give up some consumer. We want capital goods, we got to give up some consumer. We want capital goods, we got to give up some consumer. Capital, consumer, right? And we have this kind of step you can kind of see. I'll draw it in here, right? We have this kind of step process of we gain but we give up. We gain some more but we give up some more. Gain some more, give up some more. Gain some more, give up some more. Gain, give up, gain, give up. Right? So each one of these is a point along this process. Right? I got A and B, but let's say this is C and D and E and F and G. Right? And what those things make up is they make up this thing that we call the production possibilities curve. So I'm going to connect those, and you will be able to see this curve that we have. It's kind of like that. All right, so in the next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start with the production possibilities curve now that you know what makes it up. Right? What makes it up is the maximum amount that you can have making decisions between combinations of these different goods with a finite amount of resources.